There are several critical issues that plague B2B sales teams that often go unrecognized by sales leaders and CEOs. Let me just share a few points here. Misalignment between sales and marketing. According to a study by Forrester, only 8% of B2B companies have strong alignment between their sales and marketing teams, leading to inefficiencies and, of course, lost opportunities. Ineffective sales enablement is another. Research from CSO Insights shows that organizations with a formal sales enablement function sees 15% higher win rates compared to those that don't. Another study by Gartner revealed that only 55% of sales leaders 55% of sales leaders don't have high confidence in their forecasting accuracy. And another data point is that of inadequate use of data and analytics. A McKinsey report suggests that B2B companies using advanced analytics in their sales processes see 5 to 10% faster growth than their peers. I could keep going on, but I think this gives you a bit of a taste of some of the issues that these teams face. So the question that comes to my mind, at least, is how do we solve these growth-related issues and focus on greatest impact with our endeavors? Our guest says her framework goes a long way in solving these. We'll get into that in just a moment. But first, hello, welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast, brought to you by Sproutword.com. I'm Vinay Koshy, and our guest is Dayna Williams. Now, Dayna, you're the author of the Diligence Fix, How Striving for More Revenue Stresses Your Sales Organization and What to Do About It. You've spent something like 20 plus years, I believe, doing consulting work for sales organizations across a number of different industries, ranging from insurance to finance to software, hospitality, and trades. And you also run the conference program for the last 7 years for the Association for Talent Development, SEL conference. I'm curious, given your experiences and in the lead up to this book, was there a particular event that triggered your thinking around what some of these key issues that you needed to address were? And if so, could you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And thanks for having me on as a guest. This is
Pleasure.
exciting. So over the last 20 years, one of the things that has colored really my career and experience is the level of access that I had to senior sales leaders, in some cases, CEOs, COOs. These conversations always started out as desire for better performance, upskilling, reskilling, training. That was really the origins behind the access. But once I had the access, I was not going to leave that conversation to chance and just focus on the tactics of skills or learning objectives. I really wanted to understand the root cause issues. I was just deeply curious. And so I created many sales trainings throughout the years. And so I had dozens and dozens of notebooks that were just collecting dust on the shelf. And just around the 2020 reality, where we all had a little extra time on our hands for that season of life, I sat back. We had just gone through a premature, but by all accounts, successful exit where I was an internal solution provider. I worked very closely on aligning solutions with the market, aligning messaging, supporting our sales team, enablement, the whole nine yards. And I sat back and I thought to myself, okay, by all measures, this acquisition, while happening very quickly, it was premature and it was successful. People were celebrating the win. And I sat back and I said, why was it so hard? Why was it so hard to get solution and marketing and sales on the same page? Why did I go to work every day in the trenches dealing with frictions and buzz saws? And then I thought back to the 2 decades of access that I had and the notebooks that were on my shelf. And I'm like, the answer lies in there. And so I just started peeling back and I was looking for patterns and trends. And what I realized was the premise of the book, which is hey, when you're striving for revenue quarter after quarter and that becomes the way of life, it stresses your sales organization and those cracks run downstream.
Hmm. I'd love to dive into that in more detail, but I'm also curious, given your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
The ability to drive clarity.
Okay.
I'm a deeply curious person, and when somebody says hey, this is the way we need to do it, or this is the way it's always been done, my first question is to ask why. And then there's a whole series of questions on the back of that. And I continue to dig until I myself can feed it back in a direct, succinct manner.
Mhm.
And then I look for ways to spread that message far and wide and help bring others along to realize the same clarity that I've gained.
And in that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
They don't know that people are watching you when you say one thing and you do another. And I shouldn't let me clarify that. I think they know it, but they don't practice it. And I share that because that sort of, do as I say, don't do as I do could apply to anything, right? It can
Mhm.
apply to sales, finance, culture, the whole nine yards. But I really do believe there's a fundamental difference between what is said in the leadership back room when no one's listening to what leaders live out every day, to what people see, and then the behaviors that they mirror or mimic.
Mm,
And really, when we think about culture is a collection of how we do things here. And so I think that's the challenge. I think leaders think that they can think or do one thing, but then tell everybody another thing, and that people will just follow that. And
mm,
that's why we have a little bit of a mess sometimes.
Brilliant. Now, earlier on, you said you noticed that the desire for growth creates more stress. For those who are listening in and going, that's interesting, what would you say indicators of this stress? Because a lot of us get so into the day to day, the minutiae of the things that we need to do that we don't really recognize some of these indicators. So, what have you observed to be some of these indicators?
Yeah, so I would say two things: friction and the tendency to reach for a quick fix. And the two most common quick fixes that I mention in the book are technology and training. If you talk to 10 sales leaders or sales enablement leaders on the street, chances are all 10 of them will tell you that their tech stack is too complicated. If
Mm,
you talk to those same leaders and you say, "Hey, when was the last time you made an investment on building or buying training?" They'll tell you like time and date. And then if you ask them how successful it was, you're going to get mixed review. You're not going to get anybody that said, "Hey, this just changed everything about the way we do things here." And then what you'll find out is in short order, the more the friction continues to take place, people feel it, they're frustrated, they're stressed, they're dreading they're fearful of accountability, right? What do people do? They pedal back out and they look for more fixes, more tech, more
mhm,
training. And of course, I'm using those as big broad buckets. There's a lot of associated things that could fall under those same categories. But those are the big warning signs.
mm. And with the book, you've titled it The Diligence Fix. For those who are unfamiliar with the book, could you explain why the diligence fix and what you mean by that term?
Yeah, of course. The idea of diligence or the term diligence, I think we know what it means. It implies discipline, accountability, consistency, grit, staying power, right? The dictionary describes it as a steady, earnest, energetic effort. And the reason why I mention that is the reason why I titled the book that is because I knew that's exactly what most sales leaders don't really want to hear. I know that for many, it falls on deaf ears because the propensity is they have to live quarter by quarter, which means
Mhm,
they have to live week by week, which means they have to live day by day to some extent. And there's this constant refrain. And by the way, the tenure of your average CRO is somewhere, research varies, but somewhere between 12 and 18 months.
mhm,
Whereas many organizations, the sales cycle is maybe 16 to 24 months. So my point is that they tend to strive putting wins on the board. They tend to go for optics. They'll chase shiny objects. And that is quite literally the opposite of diligence. And so, do I expect people when they read this book that they're going to drop all of those tendencies and ways of working and adopt this wholesale? No. This is your North Star. This is what you want to inch towards, because by creating an infrastructure, that your sales organizational structure that is steady, methodical, somewhat predictable, wholly aligned, and radically clarifying, people understand what your go to market plan is and their role. that is what's going to provide the staying power for you in your own career.
Hmm.
And so that was really the purpose of the term. And it was the purpose of really laying out this North Star vision of what it should be versus what it is every day.
Hmm. Absolutely. I think most people would agree with you with what you've just said. However, I would imagine that there is both a mental as well as a heart shift required for the organization to, especially the leadership, to buy into that and be enablers of that way of thinking and process. How do you help them navigate that journey?
Yeah, so people often ask me, like, where do I start? Right. And myself, I've recently taken on a full time leadership role where I am responsible for the full end to end go to market. So I'm living the diligence fix right now. And I am in what one could consider objectively the overwhelm stage, where there's so much information coming at you. There's so many problems. There's team members that you're trying to understand where their strengths are and where you can come alongside and help, right? So I can empathize with the listener
Mhm.
that's in it every day because I'm there too now. I think where you start is you start with yourself. You must have complete and total clarity into what the go to market plan is. That means the C suite has to be completely aligned, the CEO, COO, CFO, the whole nine yards. They have to know what the go to market, what hill are we taking, why are we taking it, and how are things going to have to change in order for us to execute it. And then I think the radical departure is you have to provide that clarity downstream. Everybody in your organization needs to be able to articulate what the go to market plan is, and they just need to adjust it to include what their role is. And they need to understand, what do I have to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing to preserve my time, which is my most valuable currency, redirect it towards high value activities, and make sure that I am on track to support the go to market plan from my corner of the world. That's where you start. And there is a part in the book that talks about, if you can visualize it on one sheet of paper, that's even better.
That's a very interesting concept. Is there a suggestion or perhaps a set of tips that you would provide for people who are desirous of breaking out of this firefighting mode, so to speak, in order to take the time to actually some tangibles around what they're actually doing at the moment versus what could be?
Sure. Here's what I have said to people in the past, and here's what people have said to me that has worked for them. The Diligence Fix as a book is really like a Rorschach painting. You tend to see out of it what you're bringing to it as you read through it.
Mm.
So some people will read it and they'll become really mesmerized and interested in the 10 dimensions of diligence in the way that I've laid them out, the watch outs, the beliefs, the whole nine yards. That's all of part 2. There's 10 of them. So they can become enamored with that. They say, oh, I need my organization to be much more situationally intelligent, or I really need people to take personal ownership. And that's great. That might be one of them. For another person, it might be, I just need to stop the cycle of reaching for a quick fix to paper over a gaping hole. And so that might be another person's thing. And then
Mm.
another person might resonate with the clarity angle that I just took. That was my path, right? My path was to start with the clarity. Me first, then others second, in terms of being able to provide a helping hand up. It's like where they say on the airplane, secure your oxygen mask before helping others, right?
Yep.
So I think that's where, so I tell people, and people have said to me that they go through the book and they highlight the areas that make most sense for where they are today. And then the idea is not to just decide, oh, reactive mode is over. No, that's going to persist for quite some time. The question then is, can you carve out 45 minutes a day for the next 2 weeks to take one step in the direction that you identified in the book that your organization needs to go? And maybe you journal your way through it and you talk about, hey, here's what we start doing, stop doing, continue doing. Here's what's working as I put these things into practice. Here's what isn't, right? And then can you take the next piece and can you chip away at the iceberg one piece at a time? And then have an honest reflection after 6 months or a year and say, how did we do? Are we moving the needle? Am I getting people on board?
Hmm. Is there a piece that we need to look at in terms of actually getting the company's leadership to buy into this whole process as well? If so, how would you address that?
Yeah, so your company's leadership alignment at the very top is going to make or break the
Mhm.
ability to truly be a diligent sales organization. I wish I had better news, but that's the truth. And it depends on obviously the size of the company and the access that you have. But I have had people send copies of the book to leaders or to a lunch and learn where maybe they just present something that they felt was relevant to their organization and introduce a topic and just start a series of conversations around it. But I think, absent of a perfect scenario where everybody is truly aligned, the best you can do is do an assessment of where the organization is strong. Do you have a CEO who's really charismatic? And can you invite that individual? And maybe that person is really good at articulating the go to market plan, but maybe he or she is a little spontaneous or reactive or doesn't follow through. All right, well, you might not be able to address all those other things, but can you invite that individual to show up and talk directly to functional teams, not just a town hall or a company wide, but can you get them to talk to marketing? Can you get them to talk and remind them, why the company's going in a certain direction? Share with them the market intelligence. Invite them along in the journey. Don't just trust that everybody else has it covered. So that's an example. It's take an assessment of your strengths, introduce these concepts to leadership, and then just invite them to journey with you at a pace that makes sense. But you may have to drive it yourself. You may have to be the quarterback. Somebody has to stand up and say, "This is on me."
Mhm. Does it also make sense, therefore, to have champions both within the leadership team as well as within your own team as you look to drive this forward?
I think champions is always a model that works best. I would also say that sometimes champions come from surprising places. When you bring people together, or you have an opportunity to audit talent to some extent, keep an eye out for maybe not just folks that do their job well every day, but who bring that little extra glint and glimmer, that enthusiasm to their work, and invite them to be part of it. But again, it's vision casting, right? So if diligence is a word you want to start to, because I think diligence is a fresher take on accountability. Like, it's a bigger word, right? It means
Mhm.
so much more than just, I want you to be accountable. Accountability has been so overused now, it's almost a little punitive. That's why in the book I call it personal ownership. But diligence is a high watermark. So if that's actually something that you want to introduce into your culture, or even your sales culture, your marketing, your CS, whatever you have control over, find the people that want to journey with you on that. And just again, the key is carve out incremental time to just focus on it without resolving, hey, I'll pick this up when the clouds part and the sun comes out.
Mhm. That's very interesting. As you were saying that, I was thinking that perhaps an approach to building relationships with potential champions and certainly forging a bit more of a deeper connection would be to essentially ensure that you are able to make them successful. And it's almost like investing in their career development as you go through this process. Uh, would that make sense as you try and roll this whole diligence program out within the organization?
I think it always makes sense to understand what bright, talented, high potential people want out of this gig. I worked with somebody who pretty regularly asks people that, especially when he takes over new leadership roles. He'll get
Mhm.
to know people and he'll say, "Hey, between you and I, what do you want out of this? Why are you here? Why have you put up with so much? Clearly, there's something that is enriching to you, or you'd like to see happen. Paint for me the ideal scenario." People don't always do that because they're afraid that maybe somehow they can't make that possibility a reality for them. I would say it's an amazing, effective rapport building tool. It drives sort of authentic dialogue. And then you can always look for ways to include people once you know what matters to them. So I
Mhm.
don't see any drawback in asking people, like, "Hey, where is your career going? What could we do here that might set you up for what's next?" Why not?
Mhm. You also talk about practical alignment. So I'm curious, what do you mean by that, and why is it necessary for institutionalizing diligence?
Yeah. I wish I had a really super slick, fun answer to that question. But when I say practical alignment, I literally mean making alignment practical. And what I say in a lot of my writings is if I had a dime for every time somebody uses the word alignment in a business conversation, like you and I wouldn't need to be having this conversation. It's become part of our corporate repertoire. And yet, how often when you go to a group meeting, which I am in many, how many people are striving to drill down ideas, priorities, critical next steps? How many people are there raising their hands saying, "All right, do we all agree on this? What
Mhm.
are the concerns? Where do we go next? Who's handling what?" We just talk and pontificate about things like alignment, but there are not enough people that drill it down into operationalizing it, about making it practical, about saying, hey, listen, there's a few people on this call that were not on this call that are going to be necessary to accomplishing what we said is important. I'll take the ball from here. I'm going to give them a primer on what we just talked about. I'll loop them in and I'll keep you guys posted. We all know there are people like that in the business. My call to action is we need more of them. And
Mm.
ideally, we need everybody to be that way. Even our leaders can't just talk at people and think that just means stuff happens, because it doesn't.
Mm. There's another term that I think is interesting: integrated development. How does that differ from traditional sales training methods and tie into this whole alignment piece?
This is probably one of my favorite topics, I'll be honest with you, coming from an L&D background. Even though, again, we all talk a good game, the reality is we tend to take a very categorical and sequential approach to how we develop people, not unlike our typical college or university experience where you started out with economics 101, 102,
Mhm.
103. We tend to do the same thing in corporate L&D, and it looks something like this: introduction to sales training, in case study sales training, advanced sales training, negotiations training. We tend to just step people through in that way, and life doesn't wait for that. And it's
Mhm.
the same thing with leaders. We tend to, and this is the example I use in the book, we tend to wait until people are managers before we teach them how to coach somebody else. The foundation of coaching is providing effective feedback. So my question is, why can't we start teaching people when they're individual contributors the art of effective feedback? And why can't we give
Mm.
them peer to peer related context so they can practice and get comfortable with the discomfort? Because one of the number one reasons why managers don't coach is they're uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. They don't want to give
Yeah.
bad feedback or critical feedback. How about we work on that really early on in someone's career and then take the next step and the next step? That's integrated development. It's saying, what does it take to be really successful here in a higher level role, whether it's a higher level individual contributor or a leader? And let's start to seed that learning early and in an integrated way.
And that makes a lot of sense. Are you also recommending certain strategies to ensure that this training leads to actual behavior change in sales teams?
So, most of us in learning and development and sales enablement do recognize that the famous Ebbinghaus statistic that says within 30 days, 80% of knowledge is lost if it's not reinforced.
Mhm.
And the reality is, we tend to take a very comfortable and routined events based approach to training, which means we tend to identify the business has an issue, create a program, launch the program, and then start that process over again. Even though we all know about that statistic, we don't tend to lean into ongoing reinforcement. We don't tend to carve out the critical concepts and present them different ways after the event until we start to see evidence that people are performing differently. And the reason why people don't is because, from a practitioner standpoint, whether you're a training person, enablement, we have come to equate our value to the organization by the volume we produce.
Mm.
So I believe that I'm going to get more kudos at the end of the year if I launch a onboarding program, a leadership module, something to help people collaborate, something to deal with conflict. I can go to my boss at the end of the year and say, I did all these things for you. and I'm probably going to get a pat on the back. However, to make learning stick, you actually just need to do one that year, and then you need to pull it all the way through and collect evidence of behavior change and then serve that back in a compelling way. But we
Very,
don't do that as a matter of course. But we all know we should. It's not a knowledge issue, it's a practice issue.
very interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but if I'm hearing you correctly, you're almost suggesting that we revamp the way we traditionally do training and make it more of an ongoing coaching type exercise within the organization. Would that be correct?
I think it's probably a combination of both. What I'm advocating for is stop segmenting and categorizing training into like training 101, 102, 103. Teach somebody, if you're going to teach somebody during onboarding, or let's not even say onboarding, let's say through like just normal sort of sales training or
Mhm.
other like role specific training you might do, layer in some personal leadership skills. Don't wait until that person has been
Right.
identified as a leadership candidate to do crash course leadership. That's what
Mhm.
everybody does today. So layer in, teach your frontline people how to give feedback. Teach them how to really lean in and resolve conflict or negotiate. Do those sorts of things. Do that early. And then, yeah, sure, stop putting every bit of resource, time, and energy into just the event based. Save some in the tank to ensure reinforcement. And while that may mean you have to reduce the volume of workshops and webinars that you do, make the business case as to why.
Mhm. Other question that comes to mind is that of the building out your talent pool and leadership team in order to ensure that it not only drives growth, but also allows for this institutionalizing of diligence, as you put it. Do we also need to be cognizant of the individuals who are most likely to better lead teams and the organization? And if so, what do we need to have in the training slash coaching that we're undertaking on an ongoing basis, as well as general performance, in order to identify the best candidates?
Are you saying outside, identify the best candidates outside to bring into the organization, or internally who we should
Internally.
tag internally? Yeah. So that's where the 10 dimensions of diligence in the book comes in, because that is actually a blueprint
Mhm.
for what diligence looks like in practice. It leaves no room for you to guess. In fact, each one is structured by showing you watch outs. Here are suboptimal behaviors that people tend to display in this area. And then it shows you sort of, the belief system and the better way of demonstrating that behavior in a workplace context. And so the first five are what we might consider A player talent at the salesperson to the client perspective. The second five is all about personal leadership, how I show up in front of the client, but also how do I show up internally? And so I would say use that as, and any talent development person internally can help you with this, but use that as your evaluation tool. Perhaps even turn it into a scorecard. Use that as a lens, in addition to other things like making your numbers and raw capability. Use that as a way to say, hey, listen, this person not only I think has a lot of experience and talent, but they also have the right sort of character qualities. They have the right sort of way that people experience them. They're diligent. And so not only do we have a leadership candidate, but we have a potentially diligent leadership candidate. To me, it's an easy button for that.
Could you walk us through the 10 dimensions, or at least give us a bit of a high level?
Yeah, sure. So we have growing relationships. So growing relationships is obviously the skill and the manner at which I look at a client organization, what they've done with us, what they could do with us, the players all involved, and I create the smart roadmap again, given where my company is from a go to market perspective. We also have situational intelligence. And so we oftentimes think about emotional intelligence, and that's fine. That's like a level one. But emotional intelligence doesn't always get you there if you cannot contextualize it for what the client wants and contextualize it for what our business wants. But if
Mhm.
you can combine context with the cues that you're picking up in the environment, and you can add the emotional intelligence lens, and you appropriately adapt your behavior given that, that is an advanced skill. And that is situational intelligence. And the very best, most highly paid salespeople have it.
Mm.
But that doesn't mean it can't be developed in others. There's just not enough people defining it right now in our space. That's number two. Number three is securing information. Securing information goes way beyond discovery. And I give a lot of examples in the book. But in a nutshell, information is one of the most valuable assets in an organization. And oftentimes we're very lackadaisical with what we do with it. We don't even write it down, we don't put it in our CRM. Securing information understands how important it is and our role not only to obtain it, but to safeguard it and use it to achieve outcomes.
Mhm.
So that's the next one. Next one is intentional listening. And intentional listening goes beyond active listening because, again, it's contextualized listening. It's picking up on the cues and the clues. It's a very close cousin to situational intelligence, but it's done wholly through the action of the next level up from active listening. And it's really going in and making listening a sales strategy, not just something that you do passively or that you do actively.
Mhm.
So you think about like passive, reactive, proactive, that's intentional listening. And then we go to persuasive communication. And if you think about the fundamental kind of consultative selling skill that says, hey, listen, when you tease stuff out in discovery, don't just like, again, let that die in your notebook or fall out of your head. Safeguard that and then adjust your presentation or how you're going to float an idea, structure it, use the client's language, and lean in with a little charm, little charisma, little passion, and deliver something in a way that is so compelling that not only does it answer the questions that they've raised in the past, but it also proactively preempts potential pushback and objections.
Mm.
And so persuasive communication, again, is a very advanced master skill in the consultative selling spectrum. So those are the first five in terms of core selling diligence dimensions. And then we go down to the next row. And the next row is going to focus on, again, those personal qualities. So I have personal ownership, and that is every bit the buck stops with me. I am accountable. When we did that example of there's not enough people in the room that say, hey, listen, I love that we're gaining agreement here. Let's make this actionable. And you know what? I'm not looking to you, I'm looking to me. Let's do this, right? That's personal ownership in action. The next is time planning. And time planning is all about just not time management as if I'm like just trying to hold on and manage what I have. It's realizing that time is currency and it's my responsibility to steward that time in a way that is going to serve the best interests of my organization, my client, and myself. And so it is a strategic doling out in the same way that you would dole out, hopefully, if you're smart financially, you dole out your monthly dollars or your money. You're not just woo. You're really
Yeah.
intentional, hopefully, about how you're spending it. It's the same idea. So next one is service mindset. And service mindset is this idea that customer service isn't for success or somebody with service in their title. It's a concierge culture. Like I am here, and people call it servant leadership, and that's all well and good. But there is a sales strategy and interpersonal strategy behind this idea of a service mindset. And I try to drill it down into a very simple, everyday example. When you're out in public and you walk up to a store, there are people that hold the door for you, and then
Mhm.
there are people that just let it slam in your face. Which one are you? So that's the other one.
Yeah.
Next one is winning drive. And so winning drive tends to uh, skill a salesperson so that they are harnessing their enthusiasm and their competition and their thrill of the win towards what is going to lift the entire company up, not just selfishly help them get over the finish line and get their
Mhm.
commission. It's a much more like global citizen mentality than it is, I'm just out to get my nut. And
Mhm.
there's just too many salespeople that get tagged. Oh, this is an excellent salesperson. But when you look at it, they're out there getting their number on the backs of all of their team members at the expense of many other people. And so I would argue, are they really a good salesperson? And so your winning drive helps you make better sense of just somebody who makes their numbers. And it helps you understand, is this kind of a good citizen of this organization? Are they, part of the system, not just bucking the system? And that may be another great criteria when trying to say, do I want to elevate this person? Too many people get elevated just based on quota, and then they turn out to be terrible leaders. So winning drives, I think, that dead ringer for criteria.
Yep.
And then the last one is really all about resiliency. It's this idea that it's called inner resolve, and it's this idea that you're going to get knocked down a lot in sales, in the corporate arena. We know that society is doing it to us left and right. Have you developed a truly robust, responsive inner toolbox to cope? That's really what it is. And a lot of times we tend to think, well, that's something that I got to do therapy wise outside of work. I don't know. It's all connected. The same way that you respond to stress at home is the same way you're responding to stress with a coworker or with a client. And so, to the extent that you really lean in and develop those coping skills, is going to be the ability for you to bounce back in the face of triggers and stress and get back in the saddle and be productive again. Those are the 10.
So a lot of focus on what some people might call soft skills, if I'm not mistaken. Having said that, does that mean we should really be focusing more on these soft skills as opposed to your traditional sales training, which is very much focused on trying to get across that line, so to speak?
So I would say that particularly the top 5, the ones that I just went through, when I
Mhm.
say the top, meaning the ones that are dedicated towards really the sales context, I would say that most sales training programs out there will map very nicely to those because they're more competency, capability oriented, not
Mhm.
necessarily skills. But you could, for example, listening and persuasive communication, you can map probably 60% of any off the shelf program to something like that. So I think to answer your question, you always have a need for skills, but if skills are not anchored to something bigger, you're not going to have consistency. You're not going to have a common language, and you're not going to have a culture change. I think diligence and the dimensions invite us to create a different culture, which again is how we do our work every day, the things that we permit to happen, the way we do things around here. You're either reactive, spontaneous, shiny objects, quick fix, or you're diligent. That's the choice.
Mhm.
And I love skills training, but if it's just hanging out there, it's like the equivalent of having popcorn for dinner. It's fine, but is it part of
Mhm.
a nutritious meal plan that keeps me healthy? No.
For those of us who are perhaps a little more quantitative in our thinking, what measurement and metrics would you suggest we incorporate into our diligence efforts in order to ensure that we're on track and able to measure the impact of our alignment and development initiatives?
Oh, the learning and development side of it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say because the reason why I say that is this is what I find with something like this, and I've gotten the metrics question before, and there is no silver bullet that I can answer because everybody has a different like value, output, and ways of getting there.
Mhm.
What I describe is this is an exoskeleton designed to sit across your specific organization and your circumstance. And it's designed to create that foundational layer by which you then superimpose those things, your KPIs, your systems, your data. And you say to yourself, okay, I have a picture of what we look like before we did this work to superimpose this and lay a more diligent foundation. And now I'm going to use the same sort of measures and metrics to say, how are we a year later? Are things improving? Our deal cycle, use more higher conversion rates. Our deals closing? Is a greater deal velocity? Is it closing faster? What about my turnover? Do I have more leadership candidates? Am I seeing evidence that people are using the learning in front of clients, or that hearing less horror stories about the way people are showing up in front of clients? So I would say, listen, if you have top down buy-in from leadership to impose, put this exoskeleton over the business, then immediately start triangulating around what's the baseline status quo with the data and the metrics, and then let's measure it in increments, right? By quarter, end of the year, whatever. If, though, you're in one of those common situations where you have to do what you can do, and we're doing that like hour by hour per day, you're circling what you want to accomplish, carving out a little bit of time, and then going back to reaction mode until
Mhm.
you can slowly right size the ship, get champions, and start to get noticed. That's going to be a lot harder. The only thing you're going
Mm.
to be able to do yourself is track, okay, as I'm able to devote more time and as I'm seeing some early wins, am I getting any gains on the metric side? And if you are, after 6 months or a year and a half, then by all means, weave that story into your data storytelling. Hopefully, you're not
Mm.
just providing reports and whatnot. Hopefully, you've crafted your narrative. Speak to that, because that's going to be your efforts are going to be invisible if you do not bring them to the forefront. And then, if diligence becomes part of the equation, it's visible to people. Now, I think you can expect it probably to be in demand across the rest of the business.
And for a sales leader or a senior executive who's looking at the 10 dimensions, are there metrics that you would prescribe to ensure that they're tracking across each of those dimensions?
I would probably have to sit down and have a more detailed conversation to
Right.
understand what do they want to drive. So I'll give you a perfect example. Is the goal to leverage those dimensions to identify more high potential sales leader candidates? Then I think there'd be a certain set of metrics we would do there. We'd have to design a scorecard, right? We'd have to evaluate. We'd have to layer in other impacting factors, and then we'd have to look at it after a segmented period of time and say, all right, where were we before we undertook this?
Mhm.
And where are we now? Has our leadership candidate pipeline grown? Have we been able to actually tap folks and put them in the role and have them be successful in that role? And then I just built out that example a little bit to understand that there's probably 2 dozen various ways that those 10 dimensions could be used. And I think you'd have to do a little bit of legwork to tease out what measures you would do to make sure that it's not just the diligence dimension that's being measured,
Mhm.
but it's how it's in practice connected to an initiative that you've identified as a priority.
As for some, at least some of us, to help us wrap our minds around this concept, could you share perhaps a case study where an organization has really looked at this whole idea of the diligence fix and then tried to implement it? What sort of results have they gained as a result?
Yeah, so what I would say is that the book is relatively new. It was soft published last year, but we had a little bit of a push in the fall and starting to see even more traction this year and leading into the summer. What I would say is the work that I'm doing now is a case study in progress.
Mhm.
Because, like I said, I am in that position where I am part of the executive team. I have control over the full go to market. I am still in, to some extent, the evaluation stage to get a baseline of just how diligent or undiligent the organization
Mhm.
is. And then from there, I'll start building what does the blueprint look like to ensure that our people and our resources are fully aligned in a practical way to execute the go to market plan in 2025. But
Mhm.
in the meantime, this is what I'm advocating. While I'm still undertaking the observation and building the blueprint for the rest of this year, I'm not just waiting to take action. I'm actually going out ahead and leveraging the clarity lever, making sure that I can articulate the go to market plan, I can visualize it. And so, whenever we're having key conversations with contributors, I'm starting with it. And I'm using that so, and I'll give you an example. We were at a meeting last week, and the company has these various personas, and yet we know that only a handful of the personas, one, two, three, four of them, of 10, do we want to leverage to support the go to market plan. But everybody else was trying to be all things to all people. So they were trying to strive to talk to all 10 when, let's say, we want to just talk to 2 or 4 of them. And so the phrase that was introduced was the blue box persona. And that was this idea that there may be 10 boxes, but there's only 2 to 4 of them that have the blue box. And so as I start every conversation with team members, it's all right, let's remember our 6 pillar plan And let's start this conversation in a way that we honor the needs and the preferences of the blue box persona. And before you know it, all the fuzziness starts to fall off of people's eyes and they're ready. They're like, all right, yeah, I might have brought this up, but that doesn't make sense for blue box. Exactly. So that's a great example of while we're building the diligent blueprint for next year, I can start with clarity today. And it's
Mhm.
already making a difference in giving people time back, making them enthusiastic, helping them have more empowerment or agency over what they do and not do. It's a really interesting thing to watch.
Mhm. Absolutely. In this whole area of the diligence fix, as and with the many conversations that you're having, is there perhaps an aspect or two that you find doesn't get talked about very much, or perhaps glossed over? If so, what would they be?
I'm not sure. I have a guess maybe that people might bypass sort of the training parts of the book that really lay
Mhm.
out because I really left nothing to chance. I didn't assume that people just understood training. So I took a very deep dive into that. If you're a training person, you're nodding wildly. If you're a senior leader, you may be very inclined to skip over it and say that's for the training people. I would suggest that you don't do that because I wrote it for somebody who is a non-training person. It's
Mhm.
what you might consider like a crash course. So if you care about how if I'm speaking to a senior leader now, if you're not in training or talent, but you care how your dollars are being spent and you want to know why, it may or may not make sense to bring in, let's say, an outside vendor for $250,000 for a program if you have expectation set A and they're only able to deliver on expectation set B. Use this as a primer to understand maybe why things haven't been working and the role that your team needs to play in pulling that through. It's really just a guess. I will say that I did describe it as a Rorschach painting because that's what I've picked up from my readers who have reached out to me. People get excited, and when I say, what was it that stood out for you or what was helpful, they all say something different. And that's fine. That's fine because at the end of the day, like revenue organizations are dynamic, they're individualized, they're complex. And as long as there's something in it for you that you can do, you can start to think about and make positive strides, let's go for it. So there
Mhm.
is no common thread, but if I had to guess, I would say it would be very tempting for somebody who's time pressed to skip over that section. But it was designed to give you an accelerated education on what training options are available, what mistakes people make, and that's just enough to be dangerous.
Mhm. Brilliant. To wrap things up, Dana, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
Push it off for another day. If you're looking around at your business and you see a reactive cycle of quarter after quarter, year after year, constantly striving for more revenue, more products, more solution, new vertical focus, accept more wallet share out of existing accounts, if that's the constant refrain, and then the constant reaction is we need to throw more people at this, or we need to bring in some more tech, or we need some training. If there's these constant quick fixes, even if like, people are sincere or intended, if it's constantly just throwing more resources at it, or frankly, even asking people to do more with less, that's your sign that you're really
Mhm.
living in a situation that is the system that's cracking. And at a certain point, those cracks give way and the entire house can come down.
Hmm.
So don't find diligence in its purest form in that book to be daunting. Go through it and circle what matters to you, what matters to your business, and then take small chunks of time to either educate yourself, educate others, test and trial some things, and inch your way there if you have to. But Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither are diligent organizations.
Mhm.
So why not start tomorrow?
Terrific. And for listeners who are curious, want to find out more, or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's called thediligencefix.com, which is the name of the book. Book is available on Amazon if you'd like to. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Dayna Williams. You'll see that my current organization is the Myers-Briggs Company. So if you see that, then you've seen me. And if you'd like to come to the Cell conference in old town Alexandria, Virginia, I'll be there hosting and speaking from the main stage at the end of October. So I'd love to invite you. If you want a discount code, reach out to me. I'd be happy to give you a discount. And yeah, I just listen. I'm here to help, and I'm here to wish you success as you do the important work of leading organizations that are responsible for revenue.
We'll include links to that in the show notes. Dayna, thank you so much for doing this. It's been terrific.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.